On the night of June 20th, 1947, Bugsy Siegel was relaxing, without an apparent care in the world. Inside a lavish Beverly Hills mansion at 810 North Linden Drive, he sat on a floral-covered sofa next to his associate, Alan Smiley. The 41-year-old gangster, known for his violent temper but also his considerable charm, seemed to be in good spirits, casually reading the Los Angeles Times under the glow of a table lamp. The living room drapes were wide open to the warm California night, an oversight for a man with a long list of enemies. Outside, hidden in the darkness and less than 14 feet away, a marksman took aim. The hitman rested the barrel of an M1 carbine on the exterior of the window and pointed towards his illuminated target. Then, suddenly and without warning, shortly before 11, the quiet was shattered by a volley of 9 shots, tearing through the glass. 4 of the 9 shots found their mark with brutal precision. 2 bullets ripped into Siegel's torso. 2 more struck his head, and for Bugsy, the end was almost certainly instantaneous. Alan Smiley, in a miraculous stroke of luck, dove to the floor as the shooting started and escaped with only a bullet hole tearing through the sleeve of his jacket. To understand who pulled the trigger, and more importantly, who gave the order, one must first understand the man whose violent life came to an even more violent end. Bugsy was born into a world he was determined to escape by any means necessary. The son of poor Jewish immigrants from the Galicia region of Austria-Hungary, he was born in Brooklyn in 1906 and grew up surrounded by the poverty of the Lower East Side. He rejected the humble life of meager wages his parents endured and, from a young age, sought a faster path to wealth and status through crime. He started by running a brutal protection racket, targeting pushcart peddlers from his community who operated in a legal gray zone. If a vendor refused to pay for his protection, someone would just happen to douse their cart in kerosene and set it ablaze, a terrifyingly effective business model. It was on these tough streets that Siegel forged the most important alliance of his life. He befriended Meyer Lansky, another ambitious teenager who possessed the intellect and strategic mind that perfectly complemented Siegel's sheer aggression and fearlessness. Together, they formed the Bugs and Meyer mob, a gang that quickly became a feared force in New York's underworld. With the advent of Prohibition, they moved into the lucrative business of bootlegging, hijacking liquor shipments from rival outfits, and serving as hitmen for various crime families. Siegel's personality was a study in contradictions. He was strikingly handsome, impeccably dressed, and charismatic. He was obsessed with the concept of class, believing it was the only thing that mattered in life. He cultivated an image of sophistication, buying an apartment in the Waldorf Astoria, and routinely visiting high-end nightclubs where he would flex his success. He was vain, using face creams and washes every morning and night to maintain his youthful looks in what I can only assume was the style of Patrick Bateman. In the mid-1930s, after establishing himself as a hitman in NYC, Siegel was sent to California to expand underworld operations on the West Coast. He quickly consolidated control over gambling, ladies of negotiable affection, and a variety of substances. But he also found a new stage for his unique persona: Hollywood. He became a fixture in the celebrity social scene, befriending A-list stars like Cary Grant, Gary Cooper, and Frank Sinatra. This dual identity as a charming socialite and a brutal predator was more than just a lifestyle. It was a highly effective professional strategy. His glamorous Hollywood connections provided a perfect cover for his criminal activities. This allowed him to operate in plain sight as one of the nation's first front-page celebrity gangsters, who was known to the public primarily for his social connections and charm. He leveraged his friendships for direct financial gain, borrowing $500,000 from movie stars and movie executives. His gentlemanly persona made these wealthy and powerful people believe he would make good on these loans, but he never really intended to repay them. However, Siegel's ultimate ambition lay east of Hollywood, in what was then the dusty desert town of Las Vegas. The vision for a new kind of luxury resort in Las Vegas, however, wasn't originally his. It belonged to Billy Wilkerson, the influential publisher of The Hollywood Reporter and a successful developer of popular nightclubs. Wilkerson envisioned a sophisticated European-style hotel and casino that would stand in stark contrast to the rustic establishments that then existed on the Strip. But Wilkerson, a heavy gambler himself, quickly ran out of funds during construction. Seeing an opportunity, Siegel, backed by millions of dollars from Lansky and other mob interests, muscled his way into the project, eventually forcing Wilkerson out and taking complete control. With the project in his hands, Siegel's obsession with class and his lack of business acumen proved a disastrous combination. Or should I say, it appeared to be disastrous at the time, since as you'll see, many of the steps he took to make the Flamingo unique would be what made Las Vegas what it was and is. The hotel's budget, initially estimated at around $1.5 million, spiraled out of control to a staggering $6 million. Siegel demanded unprecedented luxuries, many of which were unheard of in the desert at the time. Each apparently misspent dollar would be yet another woodpecker of mistrust, brutally pecking away at the bonds between Bugsy and his financial backers. He insisted on full air conditioning, lush gardens with imported palm trees, and most extravagantly, private sewer lines for each of the hotel's 105 rooms. Interestingly, Bugsy ended up getting fleeced repeatedly and consistently by contractors, who realized that he had a lot of money and no business sense. He would nickname this hotel and casino resort in the desert the Flamingo, supposedly as a nod to his girlfriend, who had notably long legs. Back east, his mob investors were furious, and they grew deeply suspicious that the massive cost overruns were not just due to mismanagement. They believed that he may be skimming millions of dollars from the mob to fund his fancy Burt Reynolds tier lifestyle. The situation came to a head in late December 1946 at the National Hotel in Cuba, where Lucky Luciano, now exiled from America, convened a major summit of crime bosses. One of the most pressing items on the agenda was what to do about Bugsy Siegel and his money pit in the desert. Many of the bosses argued that Siegel had shown blatant disrespect and had to be eliminated. The meeting reached a dramatic climax when Meyer Lansky stood up to defend his childhood friend. According to some who later talked about what happened at this legendary meeting, Lansky's advocacy ended up saving Bugsy's hide for the time being. His life hinged on whether the Flamingo would be the massive money printer it was supposed to be. The opening, scheduled for the day after Christmas 1946, was a complete catastrophe. A rare winter storm grounded the private planes Siegel had chartered to fly in his Hollywood friends. While some celebrities made it, the star power was severely diminished. Worse, the hotel portion of the resort wasn't even finished, so there were no rooms for the gamblers who did show up. The high rollers who won big at the tables simply took their cash and went to stay and spend at the neighboring hotels and casinos. Within its first week, the Flamingo's casino lost a reported $300,000. Humiliated and hemorrhaging money, Siegel was forced to shut the doors within weeks of the opening while the casino restructured. However, he would soon be cut down by that bullet, and he would never be able to fully oversee the next steps in the Flamingo's life cycle. The most widely accepted explanation for Siegel's slaying is that it was a cold, calculated business decision made by mob interests. From the mob's perspective, Siegel was a liability. He had mismanaged a massive $6 million investment, shown blatant disrespect to his powerful backers, and was widely suspected of stealing from them. In the unforgiving world of organized crime, these were capital offenses. His execution was a message to everyone in their sphere of influence. No one, no matter how famous or feared, was above the bottom line. The most compelling evidence supporting this theory is the swift and seamless takeover of the Flamingo. Just minutes after the shots were fired in Beverly Hills, 3 of Lansky's top associates, Mo Sedway, Gus Greenbaum, and Morris Rosen, walked into the Flamingo's casino. They calmly announced to the staff that they were now in charge and immediately started running the show under the direction of Lansky. This perfectly coordinated transition, executed almost simultaneously with the slaying hundreds of miles away, strongly indicates a pre-planned action. Under this theory, Lansky had advocated for his friend at the Havana conference and promised that Bugsy would make good on his promises. Lansky in turn is speculated to have been told that if his friend didn't make good, he would have to do the deed himself. While the mob hit remains the historical consensus, Siegel's slaying is still officially an unsolved case, and several compelling alternative theories have emerged over the decades. Another plausible scenario points to a more personal motive: revenge. Siegel's relationship with his girlfriend, Virginia Hill, was famously passionate, but also incredibly volatile, to the point where it was an open secret that he was roughing her up. This has led to the theory that one of Hill's brothers eliminated Siegel in retaliation. An employee who worked at the Flamingo claimed that he personally overheard one of Hill's brothers, a U.S. Marine, threaten to shoot Siegel after seeing bruises on his sister. Notably, Hill's behavior itself was quite suspicious, and she took a completely unplanned flight to Europe just days prior to the attack. Some think that she had been skimming money from the mob herself, and that she helped set up Bugsy in return for the mob looking the other way from her transgressions. Others speculate that she knew what her brother was going to do, and that she had a discussion with Lansky about it. In this scenario, Lansky gave the okay for her brother to attack Bugsy, but needed the details of the attack. This, in essence, secured her brother from retaliation going forward, and gave Lansky time to plan the takeover of the Flamingo. It also would have saved Lansky the trouble of directly taking out the man he came up in the organized crime world with. Despite the speculation and the compelling nature of these theories, the slaying of Bugsy Siegel remains one of America's most famous cold cases. No one was ever charged, and the Beverly Hills Police Department file still somehow officially remains open today, even though the perpetrator is surely deceased. Perhaps the ultimate irony of Siegel's life is that his greatest failure became his most enduring legacy. The Flamingo, which he reopened in March 1947, had just begun to show a profit by May, but if he was eliminated for that reason, it was too little too late to save him. After his passing, under the shrewd management of Mo Sedway and Gus Greenbaum, with Lansky acting as overseer, the resort became an immediate and massive success. It reportedly earned a very handsome profit of $4 million in its first year of operation, and the cost overruns were completely covered. This success proved the viability of Bugsy's vision and kicked off the golden age of mob-controlled casinos in Las Vegas. Hey everyone, Jimmy here, asking you to hit that hype button and hype up this video. This helps the visibility of this video in the algorithm and helps out my channel massively. Anyway, we've got a lot more ground to cover, so let's get back to business. It takes less than 5 minutes for a family's world to shatter. To put this in perspective, this is less time than it takes to boil a kettle of water or to give Freebird a listen. In that brief window, a perfect June afternoon can curdle into a nightmare, and a beloved child can step behind a bush and drop off the face of the earth. For the Martin family, that window opened and closed on June 14th, 1969, in the vast, beautiful, and unforgiving wilderness of the Great Smoky Mountains National Park. What followed was not just the frantic search for a missing boy, but a story of chaos, heartbreak, and an unexpected legacy that would change the science of saving lives forever. This is the story of Dennis Martin, the vanished boy who would capture the nation's attention. For the Martin family of Knoxville, Tennessee, the annual Father's Day weekend camping trip was a cherished tradition. In June 1969, William Martin led the familiar expedition, bringing his two sons, 9-year-old Douglas and 6-year-old Dennis, along with his own father, Clyde. For Dennis, who was just 6 days shy of his 7th birthday, this was his first time along on this trip. The first day went as planned, and the family hiked from Cades Cove to Russell Field, camping for the night before continuing their journey on Saturday, June 14th. Their destination was Spence Field, a beautiful highland meadow nestled along the Appalachian Trail, known for its stunning views. There they met up with another family, and the afternoon unfolded in the idyllic way of such outings, with the adults relaxing and the children playing. Sometime after lunch, the boys hatched a plan. In a fit of youthful excitement, they decided to play a prank on the adults by splitting up, hiding in the dense foliage that bordered the meadow, and jumping out to surprise them. William Martin watched with amusement as the children whispered and plotted. Because Dennis was wearing a bright red t-shirt, the older boys worried he'd be too easy to spot, so they sent him off in a different direction to hide by himself. It was a seemingly innocent decision, and in any other moment it would have been a minor and forgotten detail in a children's game. But that red shirt, which should have been a beacon of visibility, would instead become an icon of an impenetrable mystery. At approximately 4:30 that afternoon, the mousetrap was sprung. The older boys leaped from their hiding places with shouts and laughter, but Dennis didn't appear. His father, William, had seen him go behind a bush just moments before, and at first there was no alarm. But as the seconds ticked by, a knot of unease began to form, and time began to move slowly. William would later estimate that 5 minutes passed, and initial concern turned into full-blown panic. He began calling his son's name, his voice cutting through the mountain air, but there was no answer. William immediately began a frantic search, running down the trail for nearly 2 miles, convinced his small son couldn't have gone any farther. The other adults joined in, scouring the nearby woods, but absolutely nothing was found. As dusk began to settle over the mountains, the family's nightmare was compounded by a new, formidable adversary, the weather. A severe thunderstorm rolled in with terrifying speed, unleashing a biblical deluge which caused streams to develop into raging torrents. Temperatures dropped to unseasonable lows, only about a dozen degrees off freezing. The storm was more than just bad luck. It was a catastrophic event that acted as an accomplice to the disappearance. It systematically erased the few clues that might have existed, washing away footprints, obliterating any scent for search dogs, and ensuring the scene was wiped clean. The official search for Dennis Martin began at 5 the next morning, Sunday, June 15th. What started with a crew of 30 National Park Service personnel rapidly escalated into the largest search and rescue operation in the history of the Great Smoky Mountains National Park. The numbers were staggering, and within a day, the force grew to 240 people. By Dennis's 7th birthday on June 20th, nearly 800 people were combing the mountainside. The effort peaked on June 21st, with an astonishing 1,400 searchers involved. The call for help had been answered by a diverse and dedicated coalition. There were park rangers, local rescue squads from several states, scout troops, college students, firefighters, and even 40 elite Green Berets from Fort Bragg. The story captivated the nation, with President Richard Nixon reportedly monitoring the situation from the White House. Notably, this massive search effort actually had more in common with a disorganized posse than with what we presently think of when we think of search and rescue. At the time, the National Park Service had no detailed, pre-existing search and rescue doctrines. The prevailing philosophy was called surround and drown, where you just take as big a wave of people and sniffer dogs as possible and deluge the area. This surround and drown approach proved to be a catastrophic mistake. The massive, uncoordinated wave of well-intentioned but largely inexperienced volunteers descended on the area, inadvertently destroying the very evidence they were there to find. Potential footprints were trampled, scents that may have still existed were contaminated, and delicate clues like broken twigs were obliterated. The paradox is disturbing. The immense public desire to help did more to hurt the efforts than anything else. The search was officially scaled back on June 26th, largely abandoned by June 29th, and formally closed on September 14th, 1969. The deluge of men and women had receded, leaving the mountain just as silent as it was the moment Dennis disappeared. In the vacuum left by the failed search, theories began to grow. With no body, no clothing, and no concrete evidence, the disappearance of Dennis Martin became a case on which people projected their wildest fears. The most straightforward and officially accepted theory is that Dennis simply wandered off, became disoriented, and perished from exposure or an accident. The area is known for its incessant winds that can easily drown out a small child's cries. While there's no direct evidence to support this claim, this is the official stance of the authorities. The Great Smoky Mountains are home to a variety of wildlife, including black bears and feral pigs, leading to speculation that Dennis was attacked and carried off. Some reports from the time noted that a drought the previous year had made animals bolder and hungrier than usual. However, wildlife experts and many investigators were skeptical of this theory. A predatory attack on a human by a black bear is exceedingly rare, and an event violent enough to carry away a child would almost certainly have left behind some evidence. Still, this theory hasn't been entirely dismissed and is theoretically possible. From the beginning, Dennis's father, William Martin, believed his son was kidnapped. This theory hinges on a single and deeply problematic piece of testimony. On the afternoon Dennis vanished, a tourist named Harold Key and his family were in the park, miles from Spence Field. They reported hearing a loud scream, and then shortly thereafter, they witnessed a rough-looking man advancing through the woods. For investigators, it was a highly unreliable lead. The sighting occurred around 5 trail miles from the disappearance site, a significant distance for someone to carry a child in a short amount of time through rough terrain. Further, there are no direct trails connecting the two locations, meaning that this man would have had to have taken Dennis through the woods directly. The absolute lack of resolution in the Dennis Martin case created a perfect environment for regional legends to attach themselves to the story. Generally, I don't mention these sort of theories for cases such as this, but here there appears to be a significant amount of people who advocate for this theory. For generations, local folklore has included tales of feral people living in the wilderness. Inevitably, the story of the lost boy became intertwined with these legends, with some speculating he was taken by such a group. Notably, Harold Key's description of an unkempt and shaggy man is cited as evidence by people who believe this theory. More than 50 years later, the fate of Dennis Martin remains one of the Great Smoky Mountains' most profound and enduring mysteries. The forest has kept its secret, and it's virtually impossible that we will ever know for certain what happened in those brief minutes at Spence Field. For now, Dennis Martin's case remains yet another haunting, unsolved national park enigma. In 1988, an unidentified serial perpetrator is believed to have slain at least 9 women and caused the disappearances of 2 others in Massachusetts. This individual has become known to law enforcement and the general public as the New Bedford Highway Killer. The victims were primarily companionship workers struggling with addiction and were discovered along and around major highways, notably Interstate 195 and Route 140. Robin Rhodes, 29, is believed to have gone missing sometime in March or April 1988. She was eventually discovered on March 28, 1989, along Massachusetts Route 140 southbound in Freetown by a search dog. Unlike most of the other women, she was not known to be involved in illicit activities, though she was known to associate with people who were. Rochelle Doparala, 28, disappeared sometime during late April 1988. On December 10, 1988, her body was discovered by people riding ATVs in a gravel pit along Reed Road, about 2 miles from Interstate 195. In May 1988, 25-year-old Deborah Lynn McConnell of Newport was last seen by her father following her mother's funeral. She is considered to be the 3rd victim. A cadaver dog found her body on December 1st, 1988, off Massachusetts Route 140 northbound in Freetown. On May 27, 1988, 29-year-old Deborah Medeiros of Fall River was reported missing after a fight with her boyfriend in New Bedford. Although Deborah's boyfriend was initially a person of interest, he was ruled out as a suspect. 19-year-old Christina Montero was last seen sometime in May 1988. She's not been heard from since, though according to authorities she's presumed deceased. It's unclear why authorities believe this. However, given that this is an active, ongoing investigation, evidence is released on a need-to-know basis. Marilyn Cardoza Roberts, 34, was last seen sometime in June 1988 and was reported missing in December 1988. She lived near Christina Montero and, like Montero, remains missing to this day. Also, like Montero, she's presumed deceased with no indication given as to why this is the case. 36-year-old Nancy Lee Paiva of New Bedford was last seen walking home from Whispers Pub on July 7, 1988, following an argument with her boyfriend in the early hours. Her body was found on July 30, 1988, beside Interstate 195 in Dartmouth, lying on her back, with her feet pointed toward the highway. Authorities noted that the staging of her body was similar to how Deborah Medeiros was discovered, suggesting the same perpetrator. Naturally, her boyfriend was initially considered a suspect, but was eventually cleared of all suspicion. On July 11, 1988, 35-year-old Deborah Greenlaw DeMello was last seen in New Bedford. Her body was discovered on November 8, 1988, off the eastbound Reed Road ramp of Interstate 195 by a highway crew. Her clothing was scattered among tree branches, and she was found in possession of some of Nancy Paiva's belongings. 26-year-old Mary Rose Santos, from New Bedford, was dropped off near the downtown bus station on July 16, 1988, by her husband. She was last seen dancing at the old quarterdeck lounge about 5 hours later. Her body was eventually discovered on March 31, 1989, along Massachusetts Route 88 in Westport by 2 boys. Sandra Botello, 24, reportedly left her apartment at 11 p.m. on August 11, 1988, and never returned. She was the final victim to be discovered, found on April 24, 1989, in the woods along Interstate 195 in Marion. On September 4, 1988, 25-year-old Dawn Mendez was last seen leaving her apartment in New Bedford to attend a family christening. Her mostly skeletal remains were discovered on November 29, 1988, on the westbound Reed Road ramp off Interstate 195 by a sniffer dog. The investigation into these slayings was extensive, involving local and state law enforcement agencies. Several suspects were considered, including local attorney Kenneth Ponte, who had represented some of the victims in legal matters. Ponte was indicted for the slaying of one victim, 28-year-old Rochelle Doparala, but the charges were later dropped due to insufficient evidence. Another potential suspect, Anthony DeGrazia, was arrested for a variety of SA activities in the area. While he was out on bail, the authorities stated that he was the prime suspect in the New Bedford slayings. As a result of this, he was either slain, potentially by a loved one of the women, or taken out by his own hand. Notably, the authorities later retracted the statement that he was the quote-unquote prime suspect in this case. Perhaps the most intriguing theory revolves around a European serial perpetrator known as the Lisbon Ripper. Between 1992 and 1993, 3 women in Lisbon were found slain, their bodies bearing signs of vicious attacks. Speculation about a possible connection emerged because both cases involved victims of Portuguese ancestry. Some theorists proposed that the Lisbon Ripper and the New Bedford Highway Killer could be the same individual, supported by the timeline and the supposedly eerily similar victim profiles. In 1785, a farmer plowing a field near the ruins of an ancient Roman town struck something hard in the soil. He unearthed a heavy gold ring, an artifact that's now nearly 1,600 years old, and unwittingly stepped into a mystery that spans millennia. This was no ordinary lost ring. It was the Ring of Silvianus, an object entangled with an ancient curse. In the decades to follow, historians would connect this ring to a Roman curse tablet that demanded divine vengeance on the thief responsible for taking the ring. The Ring of Silvianus is a Roman gold ring dating to around the 4th or 5th century AD. It's an unusually large ring, so hefty that it may have been designed to be worn over a glove. The design is striking. The ring's band has 10 facets and carries a Latin inscription, and it's topped with a square face engraved with a figure of the goddess Venus. And if there was any doubt as to who was being depicted on it, the ring literally says Venus engraved into the face. This means it likely functioned as a signet ring, used to stamp a seal in wax. When pressed, the word and the face would appear in the seal. More curious is the inscription on the band. It reads, Seniciane vivas in Deo, or it should read that, except the engraver seems to have botched it slightly by doubling an I and possibly leaving off the final O. The intended message is, Senicianus, live in God, a phrase typical of Roman Christian piety. In other words, the name Senicianus is literally carved into this ring, with a very Christian prayer despite the fact that the ring's face has a pagan Roman goddess on it. This mix of symbolism, a pagan deity on one side and a Christian blessing on the other, reflects a transitional time in Roman Britain. During this period, old beliefs and the new Christian faith coexisted and sometimes mingled in ways that are generally confusing to the modern mind. However, as you're about to see, this may not have been an example of religious syncretism, but rather the tale of a theft that spans back to antiquity. When the farmer found the ring in a field near Silchester, he probably had little idea of its significance. The year was 1785, and Britain was just beginning to appreciate the historical riches beneath its soil. The ring's large size and mysterious inscriptions must have caused a stir. By January 1786, the artifact was presented to the Society of Antiquaries in London by a local nobleman, Lord Arden. Soon after, the ring vanished from public view for many decades, not lost but tucked away in a private collection. It eventually made its way into the possession of the Shute family, prominent antiquarians who owned a Tudor manor called the Vine. Exactly how the ring ended up with the Shute family remains a bit of a mystery. It's presumed that the farmer or Lord Arden sold or gifted it to them, given the Shute's known interest in historical curiosities. By the late 19th century, the ring was safely kept in the Vine's library, largely forgotten by the outside world. It might have stayed an obscure family heirloom had it not been for a remarkable discovery made about 80 miles away. This is a discovery that would link this ring to an ancient curse and catapult it into archaeological legend. In the early 19th century, a peculiar tablet surfaced at the ruins of a Roman temple in Lydney, Gloucestershire. Lydney's temple, perched on a hill overlooking the River Severn, was dedicated to the Celtic god Nodens, a deity of healing and of the sea. The site was rich with finds, but this little tablet was especially intriguing. It was a curse tablet, a type of artifact used in Roman times to appeal to the gods for justice or revenge. When researchers eventually deciphered the Latin inscription on the Lydney tablet, they discovered a story that sounds eerily familiar. Quote, "For the god Nodens, Silvianus has lost a ring and has donated half its worth to Nodens. Among those named Senecianus, permit no health until the ring is returned to the temple of Nodens." Here was a man, Silvianus, beseeching a god to curse whoever stole his ring, even calling out the suspected thief by name, Senecianus. The text even notes Silvianus's promise to give half the ring's value to the deity if the culprit is brought to justice. In a dramatic flourish, someone later scratched the word redivivus, renewed, at the top of the tablet, as if refreshing the curse so it wouldn't fade with time. Imagine the anger and desperation behind that act. Silvianus clearly really wanted his ring back, or at least revenge. For years, this curse tablet sat as a curious piece of local lore. It wasn't until 1888 that the connection between the curse and the ring was publicly suggested. That year, Challoner Shute, the owner of the Vine, published a history of his estate and included both the gold ring and the curse inscription in his book. Shute speculated about the dealings of Silvianus and Senecianus, essentially proposing that the very ring in his possession was the one mentioned in the Lydney curse. The coincidence was hard to ignore. The rare name Senecianus appeared both on the ring and in the curse. If Shute was right, the farmer's field in Silchester had yielded the actual stolen ring that Silvianus cursed well over 1,000 years ago. It was a historian's eureka moment, connecting two artifacts that had been separated by time and distance. Linking the ring to the curse raises as many questions as it answers. For starters, if this ring of Silvianus in the Vine is indeed Silvianus's stolen property, why does it bear Senecianus's name and not Silvianus's? One theory is that Senecianus, after stealing the ring, had the gall to engrave his own name and a dedication to God on it. This was perhaps attempting to protect himself from Silvianus's curse by invoking the Christian deity. In a world where many still worship Jupiter and Venus, writing "Live in God" on the ring could have been a way of saying that the ring was under the protection of the new god of Rome. If true, it's a bold and ironic move by a thief, using a prayer as a shield against a curse. Another puzzle is the distance. The ring was found near Silchester in Hampshire, but the curse tablet was at Lydney in Gloucestershire, roughly 80 miles apart. Travel was certainly possible in Roman Britain, but it begs the question, did Senecianus flee with the ring across the country? Or could it be that Silvianus and Senecianus were actually locals around Silchester, and Silvianus traveled to Lydney's temple on a pilgrimage to place the curse? Notably, archaeologists found that Lydney's temple complex included a dormitory for pilgrims. This raises the potential scenario that Silvianus lost his ring while he was sleeping at the temple and someone swiped it. In that case, Sinicianus might have been another visitor who snatched the ring and made for Silchester. If the thief thought he could escape the eye of a local god by putting miles between him and the temple, he underestimated Silvianus's determination. The curse was essentially a wanted poster to the gods that could follow a culprit anywhere. Crucially, we don't actually know if the ring found in Silchester is the one from the Lydney curse, but the evidence is compelling. The name Senecianus is uncommon. Finding it on both the ring and the tablet is likely more than chance. Still, some scholars urge caution, and there's no absolute proof linking the two items, and many scholars view the whole thing as a very unlikely coincidence and nothing more. But even so, the link is essentially irresistible for anyone who likes to tell a good story, and historians enjoy a good story more than the average person. As if ancient mysteries weren't enough, the Ring of Silvianus has also woven itself into modern legend thanks to a possible connection with Tolkien. In 1929, the archaeologist Sir Mortimer Wheeler was excavating the Lydney Temple site and researching the curse of Silvianus. Recognizing that the strange name Nodens might have linguistic significance, Wheeler sought the help of Tolkien, who at the time was a professor of Anglo-Saxon at Oxford. Tolkien took on the task of investigating the name of this obscure deity. In the course of their discussions, Wheeler almost certainly mentioned the curious tale of the cursed ring that had turned up at the Vine. Tolkien, a scholar of myths and languages, and someone who you could say was a fan of world building, would have been captivated by this real-life saga. To foreshadow where I'm going next with this, you've got the story of a stolen ring with a bizarre inscription, a curse, and divine forces competing for this one ring. Now here's where history and literary legend start to intertwine. Just a few years after Tolkien's involvement with the Silvianus case, he began writing The Hobbit, published in 1937, in which a certain magical ring plays a crucial part. That ring, of course, evolved into the One Ring at the heart of The Lord of the Rings. This has led many to believe that Tolkien could have been inspired, even subconsciously, by the story of Silvianus's cursed ring. Tolkien never stated outright that the Ring of Silvianus was the model for his One Ring. In fact, despite his extremely voluminous writings in both the academic and fictional context, Tolkien never once mentioned the Ring of Silvianus. Still, we know that in 1929 he came into contact with information regarding the Lydney Temple site and the mysteries surrounding it. While there's no doubt that it wasn't directly stated as an inspiration for the One Ring, it's not hard to see how this story may have served as an unconscious influence on the concept.